Alright everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video, the Fantasy Hockey Mailbag gets opened again for Week 15 of the NHL season and Fantasy Hockey season. Excited to get through these questions. Definitely a couple players who got injured, who we don't necessarily know the timetable of their returns. Some other players being left off rosters for whatever reason. And just some other must-adds, drops, some trade questions, some lineup questions, and talk a little bit of strategy as well for the rest of the season, especially for those of you in categories leagues. I think I got 6 or 7 questions to go through here, so let's get it. All right, what do I do with Kuzmenko? I keep holding on to him, hoping that they'll either trade the guy and he'll have a resurgence, or he'll start to play up to his potential. So far, that has not happened. Is it time to drop him, or do I keep holding? So Kuzmenko, 47% rostered right now in Yahoo Fantasy Hockey Leagues. He's pointless in January. I think he's pointless in his last 7 or 8 games. He was a healthy scratch early in January. He's now been a healthy scratch 5 times this year under Rick Tocchet as the head coach. Right now playing on that second line with Pius Suter and Ilya Mikheyev. I just don't think this is a line that's going to work together. Like, it's really hard, obviously, to break up the JT Miller, Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson line right now. But I think switching those two guys, maybe getting Peterson down or moving JT Miller down. Any of those players other than Besser, I think, needs to stay with JT Miller at that point. But getting Kuzmenko up on that first line with those two guys, or playing PD with Kuzmenko like we saw a lot last year. Kuzmenko as well, 39 goals last season, but a lot of people forget or don't know, he led the NHL in shooting percentage. His shooting percentage on the year was 27%. Like, the guy was 100% due for some regression in every single facet of the word you want to think about it. Like, going into his second full NHL season, despite being at the age of 27, it's still his second season, and you see a lot of guys slump in their sophomore slump after having really good first years. There's a lot of examples out there like that. So the fact that right now we're seeing, obviously he's not meshing well in this lineup, but from what I've read from the GM on the Canucks, it doesn't really seem like they're going to trade him at this point. Obviously an extremely talented player, and we saw that last season. It's just not happening so far for him this year, but I don't think he's going to get traded. His $5.5 million cap hit is substantial, and if he's going to go to any contender at this point, I just don't know which contender actually has the room to put Kuzmenko on there, and it's a huge risk considering how much of a down year he's having this year compared to last season. So at this point in fantasy hockey, I think you can drop him. The scoring is clearly coming from elsewhere on this Vancouver Canucks team, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change. I keep thinking it will. That's not the case. So I would drop him. If you have space to hold him at this point, like, I would, but there's so many players on your waiver wire going on, playing every night, that you could stream that could help you win certain weeks. And Kuzmenko putting up donuts for the last 2 weeks or so isn't going to be helping your fantasy hockey team, so you can drop him. All right, hey man, which one of these D should I pick up in your opinion? Drysdale, Dursey, Chychrun, Gudas, Philip Hronek, Jake Sanderson, Devin Taves, and Brandon Montour. So a really good list of defensemen there to be able to pick up, obviously in a probably 8 to 10 man league if I had to guess, but all really good options. But let's look at these D-men and their stats, their ranks across the league since December 1st. I think that'll help us a little bit add some recency bias. Obviously, Montour missed a good chunk of that first half of the season as well, so part of him doing that. But looking at who's leading in points and whatnot, and we'll see kind of which is the best pickup at this point. So Devin Taves actually leads all of these defensemen in points with 15 and 5 goals in 23 games since December 1st. That's also like top 12 in the NHL amongst all defensemen. Chychrun and Montour lead in shots with 52. Not all surprising. Chychrun, especially with some of that time Thomas Chabot being out, obviously helps Chychrun's case with getting the puck on net, playing on the power play a little bit more as well. And then Montour, we knew since he was going to come back, we'd see the same. We haven't seen the same point production from him, but still we're seeing those shots on goal. Chychrun also leads in expected goals for 8th amongst defensemen since December 1st. So creating a lot of offense. So if you're looking for an offensive defenseman, Chychrun isn't a terrible option, especially with how Ottawa's playing. They're going to have to continue to score if they're going to win any sort of game right now. Like, the defense goalie situation is an absolute disaster for this team right now. Gudas obviously leading this group in hits. I don't think that's all that surprising with 43. That's top 20 amongst defensemen since December 1st. Sanderson leading in block shots. I think that's relatively surprising, but you can also look at that a little bit with Chabot out for a period of that time since December 1st. But Sanderson, regardless if Chabot's healthy or not, he is playing a ton of minutes and is continuing looking to be the defenseman I think Ottawa Senators hoped they got when they picked him early in the draft. And then looking at the last 30 days, Devin Taves leads all defensemen in fantasy hockey points over those 30 days. At least he is in my leagues, or the leagues that I'm looking at, and on Yahoo, which, count goals, assists, power play points, shots on goal, plus minus hits, and blocks as well. So I think Taves would probably be the best option. Montour, a close second. And I don't think Filip Hronek's a terrible option considering, what he's doing right now for that Vancouver Canucks team. And I think another good avenue to look at, obviously, for Bangers Leagues, Gudas, it's hard to leave him off the list. But if you need a guy for hits, it'd be Gudas. If you're looking for a well-rounded defenseman, I'd go with either Taves, Brandon Montour, or either Jacob Chychrun on that list right there. All right, the third question here. What do you think of Jamie Drysdale's fantasy value following the trade? So obviously I've talked about it in the must add. Jamie Drysdale got traded from the Anaheim Ducks to the Philadelphia Flyers for Cutter Gauthier and a second-round pick as well. I mean, the first 2 games he played was great. He's dealing with some illness right now, which has kept him out of the last 2 games. But his first 2 games, he played fantastic, had an assist in both of those, played 20 and 22 minutes, played some time on the power play as well, had a power play point in his first game as a Flyer against the Montreal Canadiens. He was a +1 in 2 overtime wins, or 1 overtime and 1 shootout win for the Flyers as well. It's hard to play some this early on in the season, but if he continues on this trajectory, I think he's 100% going to be able to be rosterable in 14-man leagues. 12-man leagues might be a little bit premature because I think there's other defensemen on the Flyers that, I still think Travis Sanheim is probably a better option. Depending on what type of league you're playing in, Nick Seeler could be a good option as well. But I think Drysdale, in terms of points production, will be very good. So if you're in a league that, has a lot of points towards goals, points, assists, plus minus, that kind of thing, that's where Jamie Drysdale is going to contribute the most. You won't see him obviously getting a ton of hits. He's not a massive guy. Block shots, if he starts to play more minutes, he will eventually get some block shots on any given night, but you're going to see his biggest contribution in fantasy hockey come in goals, assists, power play points, and plus minus, I would say, and even shots on goal as well. He's been decent with that in his first 2 games as a Flyer too. So 14-man leagues, definitely rosterable. Other than that, lower than that, I don't know necessarily if he's worth it at this point. All right, so now we get into the questions about some injuries and where some players have been. First one, what to do with Jack Eichel. So Eichel suffered a lower body injury last week, I believe it was on Thursday, has missed 2 games since. He had successful surgery on his lower body on Monday, January 15th. So they haven't been obviously disclosed a ton about what this injury is. The good news is it's nothing with his neck or back, it seems like, which is what he dealt with a ton when he was in Buffalo before. And from what the reports I've read, he's week to week. So he'll probably be back late January, early February. If I had to pick one, I'd say probably closer to early February right now. Obviously the Vegas Golden Knights need all the help they can get, but they had to make sure that Eichel is back and fully healthy 100%, because when he did get hurt, they didn't think it was that bad. Tried it out. He got hurt, came back, scored actually, and then it seemed to be a little bit worse than they actually originally thought. So week to week, I think is a solid diagnosis, and you can expect him back early February. For now, I would just put him on IR. Pick up another center if you need, but there's definitely no need you need to drop Eichel or any of that nonsense. All right, so the next guy where people are asking about, Valeri Nichushkin. So yeah, Nichushkin entered the NHLPA Players Assistance Program on Monday. We do not know the reason for the entering into the Player Assistance Program as of yet. That hasn't been disclosed by the team or Nichushkin at this point. We do know there's obviously a lot of shit going on with him last year during the stint of the Avalanche playoff run. In that first round, he missed, I think, 4 or 5 games. There was women intoxicated in his hotel room, and it never really got resolved with the media. But from what Jared Bednar said before camp this year, it seemed like it was resolved within the team, and he was fine until this point. But obviously entered the NHLPA Players Assistance Program. Not totally sure the reason, but to give you a timeline of when he could return, his teammate Sam Girard entered the NHLPA Players Assistance Program in November this year with what we knew was alcohol abuse, dealing with mental illnesses and depression. But he's back now. So he entered in November, came back mid-December, if you want to expect any sort of timeline. But obviously it differs from player to player. Nichushkin did say he wants to get back and be playing as soon as possible, but obviously has to deal with this first. So I would say expect about a month and a half until Nichushkin is back. All right, so the last question we're going to be tackling here, this guy laid out his team and was simply just asking if I should punt on hits and blocks for this upcoming week. He laid out his team and then his opponent's roster, said the categories of which they play in. And it seems like a pretty good strategy here. There's one thing I wanted to kind of mention, because there's going to be teams you come across that are definitely super block heavy or hit heavy kind of oriented teams, and this guy is certainly that. I mean, you started off, you have Dakota Joshua, Radko Gudas, and Jacob Trouba are all in the top 20 amongst hits for this season so far. And looking at, this other guy's roster who has Velarde, Forsberg, Hischier, there's not a ton of guys that have a bunch of hits on this team either. You're countering with Ovechkin and Forsberg, who are in the top 100. Kempe's just inside the top 150, but his defensemen are purely skill defensemen looking for points and assists, power play points, with Carlson, Eric Carlson, Drew Doughty, Luke Hughes. Brock Faber, is going to be getting a decent amount of assists. Obviously leads all NHL rookies in assists so far this season as well. So, and then even the guy has Andrei Svechnikov, Owen Tippett actually throws the body around a decent amount, and Blake Coleman as well. So all good in the hits category for this guy. But the biggest thing I kind of want to mention here is if you're playing a guy like this who is so hit heavy, block heavy, but you have a bunch of players, a little relatively more balanced team, and you think you can win all the other categories, you don't need to force a pickup to pick up a guy who's going to get a bunch of hits and drop someone like, Rickard Rakell, who's having a really good last 14 days. Cole Caulfield, a guy who's pretty much the only guy going to be scoring on this Montreal Canadiens team for the rest of the year. Jonathan Drouin, who's on like a 17-game point streak as well, just so you can get some hits to kind of compete with this guy when you can beat him in pretty much every other category. So that's one thing I would say about this. Appreciate this guy laying out his team and who he's playing against, and definitely a good thought from him. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of the Fantasy Hockey Mailbag Week 15. Be sure to drop your questions below so I can answer them in next week's Fantasy Hockey Mailbag. Be sure to like and subscribe so you see all the other great fantasy hockey videos we're creating on the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.